Mrs. Peterson didn't sleep much that night. She kept thinking about Danny, about his father lying in a hospital bed, about the 3 weeks of suffering she'd allowed to happen. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Danny standing in front of the class that Monday morning, pride in his voice only to be met with laughter, including hers. The next morning, she did something she'd never done before. She went to Principal Hayes's office and asked for Mr. Wright's hospital information. She needed to see him, needed to apologize in person. "I'd like to take Danny with me if that's okay," Mrs. Peterson said. "After school today. With your permission and his, of course." Principal Hayes looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "I think that would be good. Let me call his emergency contact and arrange it." That afternoon, Mrs. Peterson and Danny drove to City General Hospital together. The car ride was quiet at first, awkward. "What do you say to a kid you've wronged so badly? Your dad works here too?" Mrs. Peterson finally asked, breaking the silence. Danny nodded. 3 nights a week. Sometimes more if they need him. That's a lot of work. He says honest work is never too much. He says as long as he can provide for me and help people, he's doing what he's supposed to do. Mrs. Peterson felt tears prick at her eyes again. She'd been crying more in the past 2 days than she had in years. "Your dad sounds like a wise man." "He is," Danny said simply. "That's what I was trying to tell everyone." "I know. And I should have listened." They found Mr. Wright's room on the 4th floor. Danny knocked softly and a voice called out for them to come in. Mr. Wright was sitting up in bed looking tired but alert. He was younger than Mrs. Peterson expected, maybe early 40s, with kind eyes and work-roughened hands resting on top of the blanket. His face lit up when he saw Danny. "Hey, buddy," he said, and Danny rushed over to hug him carefully, mindful of the IV line. "What are you doing here? School's not out yet, is it?" "Principal Hayes let me come," Danny explained. "This is my teacher, Mrs. Peterson." Mr. Wright looked at her, and Mrs. Peterson saw recognition flash in his eyes. Danny had probably told him what happened. She felt her face flush with shame. "Mr. Wright," she began, her voice shaking slightly, "I need to apologize to you." He looked surprised. "For what?" "For how I treated your son. For not believing him when he tried to tell us who you are and what you do. For letting him be mocked and humiliated for 3 weeks while he was just trying to honor you." Mr. Wright's expression grew serious. He looked at Danny, who was looking down at the floor. "Danny, you didn't tell me things got that bad." "I didn't want to worry you," Danny mumbled. "You were already working so hard." Mr. Wright closed his eyes briefly, and Mrs. Peterson saw pain cross his face, not physical pain, but the pain of a parent realizing their child suffered alone. "I'm so sorry," Mrs. Peterson continued. "I made terrible assumptions about you and your family. I saw that Danny wore hand-me-down clothes and that you'd never come to parent-teacher conferences, and I judged you. I thought you weren't involved. I thought you didn't care, and I was completely wrong. I do care," Mr. Wright said quietly. "Danny is everything to me. I work as much as I do so he can have opportunities I never had. The reason I don't come to conferences is because they're always during my shift at the school. I'm literally in the building working while they're happening." The irony of that hit Mrs. Peterson hard. "Oh my God." "I asked if we could do phone conferences or change the time, but I was told that wasn't possible," Mr. Wright continued, not accusingly, just stating facts. "So I try to stay involved other ways. I help Danny with homework every night, no matter how tired I am. I read his progress reports. I talked to him about school. I thought that was enough." "It is enough," Mrs. Peterson said quickly. "More than enough. You're doing an incredible job. Danny is a wonderful student. Kind, hardworking, honest. That's because of you." Mr. Wright smiled slightly. "He's a good kid. Best thing that ever happened to me." They talked for a while longer. Mr. Wright explained how he'd gotten pneumonia, pushing himself too hard, not taking time off when he felt sick, trying to keep up with both jobs because his family needed the income. He talked about his work with genuine passion, explaining how he'd learned various skills over the years, how he took pride in keeping buildings safe and clean, how he saw his work as service to his community. "People think it's just mopping floors," he said, "but it's so much more than that. It's creating an environment where kids can learn, where teachers can teach, where everyone feels safe and comfortable. That matters. That's important work." "It absolutely is," Mrs. Peterson agreed, "and this past week proved it. The whole school fell apart without you." "I heard about that," Mr. Wright said, looking concerned. "I hope they're managing okay." They're managing, but barely. Everyone realizes now how much you do, how much we all depended on you without even knowing it. That's the thing about good work, Mr. Wright said. When it's done right, nobody notices. It's only when it's not done that people realize what they had. Those words struck Mrs. Peterson deeply. He was right. How many other people were out there doing essential work that nobody appreciated because it was invisible until it disappeared? Before they left, Mr. Wright called Danny over and pulled him close. "Hey, buddy, I want you to know something. I'm proud of you for standing up for me that day. Even though it went badly, even though people didn't believe you, you told the truth. That takes guts. Don't ever be ashamed of telling the truth or being proud of your family, no matter what anyone else thinks. You hear me?" Danny nodded, tears in his eyes. "I hear you, Dad. And I'm sorry you had to deal with that alone. Next time something like that happens, you tell me right away. I don't care how tired I am or how busy things are. You're my first priority always, okay?" "Okay." Mrs. Peterson watched this exchange, this clear love between father and son, and felt something shift inside her. She'd been teaching for 16 years, but she realized she'd been doing it wrong. She'd been making assumptions, taking shortcuts, overlooking the kids who didn't fit neat categories. That was going to change. The next few weeks transformed that school in ways nobody expected. First, Danny returned to class a hero. Kids who'd mocked him now competed for his friendship. He handled it with grace, accepting apologies but not rubbing anyone's face in what happened. He was still quiet, still reserved. But there was a new confidence in how he carried himself. Mrs. Peterson completely overhauled her approach to teaching. She started every school year now with a unit on respect, dignity, and the value of all types of work. She brought in guest speakers from different professions, custodians, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, construction workers, to talk about their jobs and why they mattered. She taught her students to see the people who made their lives better, to say thank you, to recognize that everyone's contribution had value. The school itself changed too. When Mr. Wright came back to work 2 weeks later, the entire school lined the hallways. Students made signs, teachers applauded, and Principal Hayes met him at the door with 3 things: a recognition plaque, a significant bonus, and the announcement that he'd have 2 new full-time assistants starting next month. "We should have done this years ago," Principal Hayes told him. "You've been carrying an impossible load and we took advantage of your dedication. That ends now." The district also implemented new policies: flexible scheduling for parent-teacher conferences so working parents could participate, better recognition programs for support staff, pay raises for custodians and maintenance workers, better working conditions across the board. But the biggest change was in how people saw each other. Students started noticing the adults who made their school run. They learned the names of the cafeteria workers, the bus drivers, the office staff. They said good morning. They said thank you. They picked up their trash instead of leaving it for someone else. They treated the building with more respect because they understood someone had to clean up after them. Teachers started appreciating the support staff differently. They sent thank you notes to the custodial team. They made sure to greet them by name. They included them in staff celebrations. They advocated for better pay and working conditions for everyone who kept the school running. Mr. Wright, for his part, remained humble. He accepted the recognition gracefully but didn't let it change him. He still arrived at 5 a.m. every morning, still took pride in his work, still made sure everything was clean and safe and ready for the kids who arrived each day. But now he had help. Now he had reasonable working hours. Now he could attend Danny's school events without having to choose between being a present father and paying the bills. The hospital reduced his hours there to part-time, which helped too. For the first time in years, he wasn't exhausted all the time, and Danny flourished. With the weight of bullying lifted, with his father's work finally recognized, with his own integrity validated, he came out of his shell. He started raising his hand in class again. He made friends. He joined the science club. He smiled more. One day, several months after everything happened, Mrs. Peterson asked her class to write about someone they admired. Danny wrote about his father, of course, but this time it was different. This time, when he read it aloud to the class, people listened with respect. When he described his father's work ethic, his dedication, his pride in serving others, students nodded in understanding rather than laughing. When Danny finished reading, Tyler raised his hand. "My mom's a nurse," he said. "She works crazy hours too, taking care of people. I never really thought about how hard that was until all this happened. Now I try to tell her more often that I appreciate what she does. Other kids chimed in with similar stories. Kevin's dad was a truck driver who spent days away from home delivering supplies. Rachel's mom worked at a grocery store on her feet all day, dealing with difficult customers. Ashley's uncle was a construction worker, building roads and bridges in all kinds of weather. The conversation expanded into something beautiful. Kids recognizing and honoring the adults in their lives who worked hard, often invisibly, to make the world function. Mrs. Peterson sat back and watched, realizing this was the most important lesson these kids might learn all year. After class, Danny came up to her desk. "Mrs. Peterson?" "Yes, Danny?" "Thank you for going to see my dad, for apologizing, for changing." Mrs. Peterson felt tears prick at her eyes again. Seemed like that happened a lot these days. "Thank you for being patient with me, for giving me a chance to do better. You taught me something really important, Danny. You taught me that dignity isn't about how much money someone makes or what kind of job they have. It's about character. It's about integrity. It's about how you treat people and how you show up in the world. Your father has more dignity than anyone I've ever met. He says dignity is something nobody can take from you. You can only give it away by acting without honor. Your father is a wise man. He really is." As Danny walked away to catch his bus, Mrs. Peterson thought about the journey of the past few months, about how one teacher's laughter had set off a chain of events that ultimately transformed an entire school community, about how sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected places. She thought about Mr. Wright, arriving at 5 a.m. every morning, maintaining a building full of people who'd never really seen him until he was gone. She thought about all the other people like him, the invisible workers who held society together, who made everyone else's lives possible, who served with dignity and pride even when no one noticed. And she thought about Danny, that brave kid who'd stood up with pride and told a truth nobody wanted to hear, who'd endured weeks of mockery without backing down, who'd honored his father even when it cost him everything. The janitor's son had educated them all. He'd taught them to see what they'd been overlooking, to value what they'd been taking for granted, to recognize that true importance isn't measured in salary or status but in service and character. The classroom would never look the same again. None of them would, and that, Mrs. Peterson realized, was exactly how it should be. Every morning now, when Mr. Wright cleaned her classroom before dawn, she made sure to leave him a note thanking him for his work. Every morning she arrived to find her room spotless and ready, a testament to someone's dedication and care. Every morning she felt grateful for the lesson Danny and his father had taught her about humility, respect, and the dignity of all honest work. She'd been teaching for 16 years before this happened. But in many ways her real education had just begun, and it had been taught by a fifth grader and his father, the custodian, two people who understood something fundamental that she'd somehow forgotten, that everyone matters, that all honest work has value, and that sometimes the most important people in our lives are the ones we notice least until they're gone. Now she noticed. Now they all noticed. And that made all the difference. Over the weekend, Principal Hayes did something she'd never done in her 5 years running the school. She went to the custodial office, a small space in the basement that she'd maybe visited twice before, and started going through Mr. Wright's files. Not because she was being nosy, but because she realized she didn't actually know what she was losing with his absence. She needed to understand. What she found stopped her in her tracks. The office was immaculate, despite being in the oldest part of the building. Everything was labeled, organized, documented. There were maintenance schedules going back years, detailed notes about every piece of equipment in the building, diagrams showing the locations of shut-off valves and electrical panels that apparently only Mr. Wright knew about. There were logs of repairs he'd completed, supplies he'd ordered, problems he'd identified and fixed before they became emergencies. On the wall was a calendar, and Principal Hayes stared at it for a long time. Mr. Wright's schedule was written out in neat handwriting. 5 a.m. to 7 p.m. at the school, Monday through Friday. Then 3 nights a week he had another shift listed. City General Hospital, 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. The man was working nearly 100 hours a week between 2 jobs. There were other things too. Awards he'd been nominated for but declined, 4 of them the paperwork showed. Letters of appreciation from past principals. Notes from teachers thanking him for fixing things quickly, for always having supplies ready, for making their jobs easier. A photo on the desk of a young boy, Danny presumably, holding up a spelling test with a perfect score, both of them smiling. Principal Hayes felt something tighten in her chest. How had she not known? How had any of them not known? She kept digging, and what she found was astounding. There were records of safety issues Mr. Wright had caught and fixed before anyone else noticed. A loose railing that could have caused a serious fall, a gas leak in the science lab that could have been catastrophic, water damage in the library that would have destroyed thousands of books if left unchecked. He'd identified these problems during his routine work and handled them quietly, efficiently, without making a big deal or asking for recognition. There were also financial records showing how much money he'd saved the district. Instead of calling expensive contractors for minor repairs, he'd taught himself how to fix most things. The district's maintenance costs at this school were significantly lower than comparable buildings, and now Principal Hayes understood why. Mr. Wright was essentially doing the work of 3 or 4 people, all by himself, and doing it better than most teams could. She found purchase orders he'd submitted, always looking for the best prices on supplies, never wasting anything. She found schedules showing how he'd coordinated his work to minimize disruption, doing the loudest tasks when students weren't present, handling the deep cleaning during breaks, always thinking about how his work affected everyone else. By the time she left the office Sunday evening, Principal Hayes had a folder nearly 3 inches thick of documentation. And she was furious with herself. How had she never looked at this before? How had she taken this man so completely for granted? Monday morning, she called a special assembly. The whole school, every teacher, every student, gathered in the gymnasium. There was nervous energy in the air. Assemblies usually meant either something really good or something really bad was happening. Principal Hayes stood at the podium, that thick folder in her hands. The substitute custodian was there too, looking exhausted after another weekend of trying to keep up. The building had improved slightly, but it still wasn't right. Everyone could feel it. "I'm going to talk to you all about someone very important today," Principal Hayes began. "Someone most of you probably couldn't pick out of a crowd, even though you've seen him almost every day for years." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. She found Danny in the crowd, sitting in the back with his class, looking small and uncertain. 3 weeks ago, a student in this school stood up and told his class that his father was one of the most important people in this city. He said his father helped hundreds of people every day, and that without him, everything would fall apart. The gymnasium got very quiet. Danny's classmates shifted uncomfortably. That student's teacher laughed. His classmates mocked him. For weeks, he was teased and excluded for making what everyone thought was an outrageous, impossible claim. Mrs. Peterson, sitting with other teachers along the side, felt her face burn with shame. She wanted to disappear, but he wasn't lying. He wasn't exaggerating. If anything, he was being modest. Principal Hayes opened the folder. "For the past 12 years, Mr. Wright has been the head custodian of this school. Let me tell you what that actually means." She began reading from her notes, and with each detail, the assembly grew more silent. "Mr. Wright arrives every day at 5 in the morning, 2 hours before any of you. He checks every system in this building, heating, cooling, electricity, plumbing, to make sure everything is working properly. He does this before you arrive so that when you walk through those doors, everything just works." And she flipped a page. "He cleans 32 classrooms, 8 bathrooms, 2 gymnasiums, 1 cafeteria, multiple offices, and all hallways and common spaces, every single day. He empties every trash can, mops every floor, wipes down every surface. He restocks paper towels, soap, cleaning supplies, and classroom materials. That's not a job for one person. That's a job for a team. But Mr. Wright does it alone." Teachers were looking at each other, surprise and shame mixing on their faces. But that's not all he does. When something breaks, and in a building this old, things break constantly, Mr. Wright fixes it. The leak in the second-floor bathroom last month. Mr. Wright fixed that. The broken projector in the science lab. Mr. Wright fixed that. The stuck window in the library. The malfunctioning refrigerator in the teacher's lounge. The squeaky door in the front entrance. Mr. Wright fixed all of it. She pulled out several sheets of paper. Over the past 5 years, Mr. Wright has identified and resolved 4 major safety hazards before they could harm anyone. He caught a gas leak that could have caused an explosion. He noticed structural damage that could have led to a collapse. He found water damage that would have destroyed thousands of dollars worth of books and equipment. He did all of this as part of his regular work, never asking for extra pay or recognition. Students were starting to understand now. You could see it on their faces, the dawning comprehension of what one person had been doing for all of them, invisible and unappreciated. Mr. Wright has saved this district approximately $200,000 over the past 5 years by doing repairs himself instead of calling contractors. He's found ways to reduce our energy costs, minimize waste, and stretch our budget further. He's been nominated for the district's Excellence in Service Award 4 times. He declined each nomination, saying he was just doing his job. Principal Hayes' voice was getting emotional now. And here's what you really need to understand. After leaving this school every evening, Mr. Wright goes directly to another job. He works night shifts at City General Hospital 3 times a week, doing the same essential work there. He does this because he wants to provide for his son, because he believes in the dignity of honest work, because he takes pride in making sure places run smoothly and safely, even though most people never notice. She closed the folder and looked directly at Danny's class. A young man in this school tried to tell you all of this 3 weeks ago. He stood up with pride in his father and told you the truth, and we laughed at him. We mocked him. We made his life miserable because we couldn't imagine that someone who works with his hands, someone we never really noticed, could possibly be as important as he claimed. The weight of that statement hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. Well, this past week proved him right, didn't it? When Mr. Wright wasn't here, what happened? Our building fell apart. Our schedules were disrupted. Our comfort was destroyed. Everything became harder because the one person who'd been holding it all together was gone. Principal Hayes' voice got stronger, more forceful. This young man's father is in the hospital right now with pneumonia. He got sick because he's been working nearly 100 hours a week between 2 jobs, pushing himself to exhaustion to take care of his family and to take care of all of us. And while he was doing that, while he was sacrificing his health and his time for this community, his son was being bullied at the very school his father maintains. That hit hard. You could see it on faces throughout the gymnasium, the realization of just how wrong they'd been, just how cruel they'd been to someone who didn't deserve it. So here's what we're going to do, Principal Hayes said. First, we're going to learn from this. We're going to understand that every single person who contributes to our community matters. The people who clean our spaces, fix our problems, maintain our buildings, they're not invisible. They're not less important than anyone else. They're essential, and they deserve our respect and appreciation. She gestured to the substitute custodian, who looked surprised to be acknowledged. Second, we're going to make changes. We're hiring additional custodial staff because one person should not have to carry the burden that Mr. Wright has been carrying. We're implementing new procedures to ensure maintenance needs are addressed promptly and fairly. And we're going to make sure that when people like Mr. Wright go above and beyond, they're recognized and valued. Students were nodding now, some of them looking teary-eyed. Third, and most importantly, we're going to apologize to Mr. Wright when he recovers, and to his son who tried to honor his father and was punished for it. Principal Hayes looked directly at Danny. Danny Wright, would you please stand up? Danny looked terrified. For a moment, Mrs. Peterson thought he might refuse, but slowly, shakily, he stood up, his face red, his eyes downcast. This young man showed more character 3 weeks ago than many of us have shown in years. He stood up for his father. He told the truth even when no one believed him. He defended someone who couldn't be there to defend himself. That takes courage. That takes integrity. That takes love. The gymnasium burst into applause. It started with a few people and quickly spread until everyone was clapping, many standing up. Danny stood there overwhelmed, tears streaming down his face, not knowing what to do. Mrs. Peterson was crying too, applauding harder than anyone, wishing she could take back every moment of the past 3 weeks. When the applause finally died down, Principal Hayes continued. Today we're going to do something different. Instead of regular classes, each classroom is going to spend time discussing respect, dignity, and the value of every member of our community. Teachers, I'm asking you to facilitate honest conversations with your students about what happened here and what we can all learn from it. She paused, then added, and this afternoon, anyone who would like to make cards or write letters for Mr. Wright while he recovers is welcome to do so. I'll be making sure he gets every single one. The assembly ended and students filed out quietly, thoughtfully. Danny was immediately surrounded by classmates, not to mock him this time, but to apologize, to tell him they were sorry, to say they'd been wrong. Tyler was first. "Hey, Danny, I'm really sorry, man, for everything I said. Your dad sounds amazing." "Mine too," Kevin added, looking genuinely ashamed. "I was a jerk." "I'm sorry." Rachel and Ashley came over, both crying. "We're so sorry, Danny. We should have believed you." One by one, his classmates apologized. Some hugged him. Others just stood there with tears in their eyes, trying to find words for how bad they felt. Mrs. Peterson waited until most students had left, then approached Danny herself. "Danny," she said, and her voice cracked, "I owe you the biggest apology of all." Danny looked up at her, and she saw in his eyes not anger, but hurt. Deep hurt that she'd caused. "I'm your teacher. I'm supposed to protect you, encourage you, believe in you. Instead, I laughed at you. I let you be humiliated. I stood by while you suffered. There's no excuse for that. I failed you completely, and I'm so sorry." Danny didn't say anything for a moment. Then quietly, "You just didn't understand." "That's no excuse," Mrs. Peterson said firmly. "I should have listened. I should have asked questions. I should have given you the benefit of the doubt. Your father is an extraordinary man, and you were right to be proud of him." "He really is the best," Danny said, and smiled a little through his tears. "I know that now," Mrs. Peterson said. "And I promise you, I will never make assumptions like that again." Monday morning arrived exactly 3 weeks after Danny's humiliation in Mrs. Peterson's classroom. Students dragged themselves to school with the usual Monday reluctance, yawning and complaining about having to wake up early again. But the moment they walked through the front doors, something felt different. The first thing people noticed was the smell. It wasn't terrible exactly, but it wasn't right either. There was a staleness in the air, like windows that hadn't been opened in too long. A faint smell of old garbage lingered in the hallways. Barely noticeable at first, but definitely there once you paid attention. Kids wrinkled their noses but didn't think much of it. Maybe someone had left food in their locker over the weekend. Then they started noticing other things. The floors, which were usually shiny and spotless every Monday morning, looked dull. There were scuff marks everywhere, dirt tracked in from the weekend that no one had cleaned. The drinking fountains had water spots and fingerprints all over the metal. The windows were streaked and dirty, making the morning sunlight come through hazy and dim. In Mrs. Peterson's classroom, the trash can was overflowing. That was weird. The trash cans were always emptied overnight, always had fresh liners in them by Monday morning. She frowned at it, but figured maybe the custodial staff had just missed one room. No big deal. But as the morning went on, the problems multiplied. A teacher down the hall discovered that one of the bathroom sinks was leaking, water slowly pooling on the floor. Another teacher found that a light bulb was out in her classroom, making one whole corner dark and hard to see. The gym teacher called the office to report that someone had left equipment scattered everywhere, and the floors were sticky, like they hadn't been mopped after Friday's activities. By lunchtime, the situation had escalated from annoying to genuinely problematic. The cafeteria was a mess. Trash cans were overflowing, creating a pile of garbage bags near the back door that nobody had taken to the dumpster. The lunch tables were sticky and dirty, like they'd never been wiped down after Friday's lunch. The lunch ladies were doing their best to prepare food, but they kept running into issues: no clean serving trays, floors that were slippery with spills from days ago, equipment that wasn't working properly. "Where's the regular guy?" one lunch lady asked, frustrated. "The one who always makes sure we're set up right in the morning?" "No idea," her coworker answered, struggling with a dishwasher that apparently wasn't draining right. "Must be out today." Kids complained about the tables being gross. Teachers had to wipe down surfaces themselves before students could eat. The whole lunch period felt chaotic and uncomfortable. Back in the classrooms that afternoon, more problems emerged. A thermostat wasn't working properly in one wing of the building, making those rooms either too hot or too cold. A window in the science lab wouldn't close all the way, letting in cold air and the sound of traffic. Multiple teachers reported that their whiteboards hadn't been properly cleaned, old marker stains still visible no matter how much they scrubbed. Mrs. Peterson stood at her own whiteboard, frustrated that she couldn't get it clean enough to write clearly. The markers were running out too, and normally there were always fresh ones in the supply closet. She'd have to put in an order, she guessed, though she couldn't remember ever having to do that before. Supplies just always seemed to be there when needed. The substitute custodial staff was running around frantically, trying to keep up. There were 2 of them covering the whole building, and they looked overwhelmed. One was mopping a hallway, while simultaneously trying to fix a paper towel dispenser that had fallen off the wall. The other was dealing with an overflowing trash situation while fielding complaints from teachers about various issues in their classrooms. "I'm sorry," one of the substitutes kept saying, sweat visible on his forehead despite the cool temperature. "I'm doing my best. This building is huge, and there's usually someone else who handles most of this." By the end of the school day, the building felt like it was falling apart. It wasn't anything dramatic, no catastrophe or emergency, just 1,000 small things not working the way they should, 1,000 little inconveniences that, added together, made everything harder and more frustrating. Teachers were exhausted from picking up slack. Students were complaining about the gross bathrooms and dirty classrooms. The administrative staff was fielding calls and complaints all day, trying to coordinate solutions to problems that kept multiplying. Principal Hayes, a woman who'd been running the school for 5 years, called an emergency staff meeting after the students left. Teachers gathered in the library looking tired and annoyed. "All right, I know today was rough," Principal Hayes began, standing at the front with her usual composed expression slightly cracked. "I want to explain what's going on. Our head custodian is out on medical leave." "Who's the head custodian?" someone asked. "I didn't even know we had a head custodian." Principal Hayes looked surprised by the question. "Mr. Wright, he's been with us for 12 years. The name meant nothing to most of the teachers. A few vaguely recognized it from emails or memos, but if you'd asked them to describe the man, they couldn't have done it. He was just there, part of the background, someone they never really thought about." "How long will he be out?" Mrs. Peterson asked, suddenly remembering that Wright was Danny's last name. "Could it be the same person?" "We're not sure yet," Principal Hayes said. "He's in the hospital with pneumonia. It's serious, but he's expected to recover. We've brought in substitute custodial staff, as you saw today, but they're still learning the building." "Learning the building?" Someone scoffed. "How hard can it be? The place is a mess." Principal Hayes' expression tightened. "Harder than you'd think, apparently. Mr. Wright maintained this entire facility essentially by himself with just one part-time assistant. He handled all the deep cleaning, all the maintenance, all the repairs, and most of the setup work. The substitutes are doing their best, but there's a lot more to this job than any of us realized." The room fell quiet as this information sank in. One person maintained this whole building? The school wasn't enormous, but it was a decent size. 3 floors, 30 classrooms, 2 gyms, a cafeteria, offices, bathrooms, storage spaces. How could one person possibly keep all of that running? "Well, we need to hire more people then," another teacher said. "This is unacceptable." "We're working on it," Principal Hayes assured them. "But for now, I need everyone's patience. We'll get through this." The meeting ended and teachers dispersed, grumbling about the situation but not really understanding it yet. They'd only had one bad day. Surely things would improve. But Tuesday was worse. The bathroom situation became critical. One of the boys' bathrooms on the 2nd floor had a toilet that was backing up, and the substitute staff didn't know where the shutoff valve was. Water leaked onto the floor, forcing them to close the entire bathroom. With one bathroom down, the others became overcrowded and dirty faster than the substitute staff could keep up with cleaning them. The cafeteria ran out of clean trays by the end of lunch because the industrial dishwasher was malfunctioning. Something about the water temperature not being right, a setting that needed adjustment, but neither substitute knew how to fix it. The lunch ladies ended up washing trays by hand, which meant lunch periods ran long, and students were late getting back to class. More lights started going out throughout the building. No one could find the replacement bulbs. They were somewhere in storage, apparently, but the storage areas were vast and disorganized, and the substitutes didn't know the system. The heat in the building became inconsistent. Some rooms were freezing, others were stuffy and hot. The HVAC system needed adjustment, but it was a complex system with a tricky control panel that the regular custodian apparently knew by heart. The substitutes were afraid to touch it and make things worse. By Wednesday, students were actively complaining. Parents were calling the office. Teachers were at their wits' end, dealing with classroom disruptions because kids needed to use bathrooms in other parts of the building, or because they were too cold or too hot to focus. or because the general grungy feeling of the school was making everyone irritable. Mrs. Peterson found herself noticing things she'd never paid attention to before. The way the floors in her classroom used to gleam and now they looked cloudy and dull. The way her whiteboard used to be perfectly clean each morning, and now it had ghost images from previous days' lessons. The way supplies used to appear in the closet before she even realized she was running low, and now she was having to ration what she had left. She watched Danny during class that week, noticed he seemed even quieter than usual, more withdrawn. His eyes were red one day, like maybe he'd been crying. She wanted to ask if he was okay, but she hesitated. What would she even say? Thursday brought a new crisis. The fire alarm went off during third period, not a drill but an actual malfunction. The whole school had to evacuate and stand outside in the cold for 40 minutes while they figured out what was wrong. Turned out a sensor needed cleaning or replacing, something that was apparently on a regular maintenance schedule that hadn't been followed. Students shivered outside, teachers tried to keep order, and everyone was frustrated and behind schedule for the rest of the day. Friday was the breaking point. Principal Hayes came over the intercom during morning announcements, and her voice had lost all of its usual polish. She sounded tired, maybe even defeated. "Students and staff," she began, "I want to address the situation we've been dealing with this week. I know the building hasn't been up to our usual standards. I know you've all been frustrated and uncomfortable." Everyone stopped what they were doing to listen. "The reason for these problems is that our head custodian, Mr. Wright, has been hospitalized. What we didn't fully understand until this week was the extent of what Mr. Wright does for this school every single day." Mrs. Peterson's heart skipped. Mr. Wright. Danny Wright. It had to be his father. "Mr. Wright arrives at this building at 5 o'clock every morning," Principal Hayes continued. "He stays until at least 7 every evening, sometimes later. In those 14 hours, he cleans every classroom, every bathroom, every hallway. He maintains all of our equipment, fixes things when they break, adjusts our systems when needed. He sets up for events, coordinates with our cafeteria staff, manages our supplies, and handles countless other tasks that keep this school functioning." The building was completely silent now. You could have heard a pin drop. "This week has shown us all how much we depend on someone most of us barely noticed, so I want to take this moment to acknowledge Mr. Wright's dedication and hard work, and to let you all know that we're hoping for his quick recovery." The announcement ended. Teachers looked at each other. Students processed this information in their own ways. Mrs. Peterson turned to look at Danny. He was sitting at his desk, tears streaming silently down his face. His head was down, but his shoulders were shaking. Other kids near him were starting to notice, starting to piece together what they'd done, because Danny had told them. 3 weeks ago, he'd stood up and told them all that his father was one of the most important people in the city, that he helped hundreds of people every day, that without him everything would fall apart, and they'd laughed at him. Mrs. Peterson had laughed at him. The weight of that realization hit her like a physical force. She judged Danny, judged his father, made assumptions based on worn clothes and missed conferences, never considering that maybe this man was working multiple jobs, sacrificing everything to provide for his son, that maybe the reason he couldn't come to school meetings was because he was literally at the school, working, keeping it running for everyone else's children. Around the classroom, similar realizations were dawning on students' faces. The ones who'd mocked Danny, who'd made up jokes about his father, who'd made his life miserable for 3 weeks, were starting to understand what they'd done. Tyler stared at his desk, his usual confident smirk gone. Rachel and Ashley exchanged guilty looks. Kevin, who'd called Danny King Danny as an insult, looked like he might be sick, and Danny sat there head down, crying silently while the truth his classmates had refused to believe proved itself in the most undeniable way possible. The school day ended quietly. No one knew quite what to say. The next morning, Danny walked into school hoping that maybe everyone had forgotten about what happened. Maybe they'd moved on to something else the way kids usually did. Maybe there was new drama, new gossip, something that would take the spotlight off him. He should have known better. The moment he stepped into the classroom, he heard the whispers. They weren't even trying to be subtle about it. Tyler was leaning over to Kevin, talking behind his hand, both of them looking right at Danny and grinning. Brittany and her friends were huddled in their usual corner, and when Danny walked past, one of them said something that made the whole group burst into giggles. Danny went to his desk and sat down, trying to make himself as small as possible. He pulled out a book and pretended to read, but he could feel their eyes on him. Could hear the whispers that seemed to follow him everywhere now. "My dad runs the whole universe," someone said in a mocking voice, and there was scattered laughter. No, my dad is secretly a superhero," someone else added, and more kids joined in the laughter. Danny's face burned. He kept his eyes on his book, not actually reading a single word, just staring at the page until the letters blurred together. Mrs. Peterson came in and started the day's lessons, but she didn't address what had happened the day before. Didn't tell the kids to cut it out or be kind. She just launched into the morning routine like everything was normal, and maybe for her it was. Maybe she didn't notice the looks Danny was getting, the way kids would lean away from him like whatever he had might be contagious. At recess, it got worse. Danny had always been a loner, but before it was by choice mostly. He liked reading under the big oak tree in the corner of the playground. He liked watching clouds. He was okay with being alone because it was peaceful, you know? But now the aloneness felt different. It felt forced. It felt like punishment. A group of boys from his class were playing basketball, and out of habit, or maybe hope, Danny wandered over that direction. He didn't get close enough to ask to join in, just stood near the court watching, but Tyler spotted him. "Hey, Danny," Tyler called out, holding the basketball. "Does your super important dad know how to play basketball? Is that one of his many crucial skills?" The other boys laughed. One of them added, "Maybe his dad is actually the president of basketball. Or the king of the world." Another chimed in. Danny turned and walked away, their laughter following him across the playground. He ended up behind the building, in a spot where teachers couldn't really see but where he wouldn't be bothered. He sat down on the concrete back against the wall and just waited for recess to be over. The thing was, Danny hadn't even been trying to brag. He'd just been proud of his dad. Wanted to share that feeling. His dad worked so hard, was gone so many hours every day and night. Danny saw how tired he'd be when he finally came home. How his hands would be rough and sometimes bandaged. How he'd still ask Danny about homework even when he could barely keep his eyes open. His dad was a hero to him. Was that so wrong? But now Danny was starting to wonder if maybe he had exaggerated. Maybe his dad wasn't as important as he thought. Maybe he'd built up his father in his mind because they didn't have much else. No big house, no fancy car, no vacations or new clothes or any of the stuff other kids had. Maybe he'd made his dad into something bigger than reality just to have something to feel good about. The doubt crept in, cold and unwelcome. At lunch, Danny sat at the very end of a long table, as far from everyone as he could get. He unwrapped his free lunch, a sandwich that looked kind of sad, some carrots, a small carton of milk. He ate slowly, methodically, trying to be invisible. But invisibility wasn't an option anymore. Two girls from his class, Rachel and Ashley, sat down a few seats away. They weren't being mean exactly, just loud enough for him to hear. "My dad says everyone's job is important," Rachel said, clearly performing for his benefit. "Like even people who pick up trash or whatever. Everyone contributes to society." "Oh, totally," Ashley agreed, nodding seriously. "Every job matters. Even if it's not like a big deal job. It's all important in its own way." They glanced at Danny and he could see the fake sympathy in their eyes. It was almost worse than the outright mockery. At least the mockery was honest. Danny finished his lunch quickly and left the cafeteria early, dumping his tray and heading to the library. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, gave him a kind smile but didn't ask questions. He found a spot in the back corner, behind the tall shelves, and just sat there until the bell rang. The pattern continued day after day. Every time Danny walked into class, there were the whispers. Every time he tried to participate in a discussion, somebody would make a comment under their breath. Something about his important father, about how Danny must know everything since his dad was so essential. The comments were always said with that mocking tone, that sarcastic edge that cut deeper than any direct insult could. Kevin started calling him King Danny whenever teachers weren't listening closely. "Make way for King Danny, son of the most important man in the city," he'd announce in the hallway, bowing dramatically. His friends would crack up and Danny would have to walk past them with his face burning, pretending he didn't care. During group work, nobody wanted Danny as a partner. When Mrs. Peterson assigned groups randomly, whoever got stuck with Danny would sigh dramatically or exchange pained looks with their friends. They'd work with him barely, doing the minimum required but treating him like he wasn't really there. Mrs. Peterson noticed some of this, surely. She was in the same room. She heard the snickers when Danny spoke up. She saw how kids avoided him, but she didn't intervene. Maybe she thought he'd brought it on himself. Maybe she thought this was a natural consequence of his actions, a lesson about honesty and not making things up. Or maybe, and Danny suspected this was closer to the truth, she just didn't think it was that big of a deal. After all, kids teased each other all the time. They'd move on eventually, find some new target, some new drama. This would blow over, but it didn't blow over. 2 weeks in, and Danny had stopped raising his hand in class entirely. Why bother? If he gave a right answer, someone would whisper that his important dad must have helped him. If he gave a wrong answer, someone would joke that maybe his dad wasn't so smart after all. There was no winning. He stopped eating in the cafeteria, started bringing his lunch outside on nice days or hiding in the library when it rained. He stopped trying to join in games at recess, stopped making eye contact with anyone if he could help it. He moved through the school day like a ghost, there but not there, present but not participating. His grades didn't slip. He was too diligent for that, too aware that school was important even if it was miserable right now. But the light in his eyes dimmed. The kid who'd stood up with such pride that Monday morning, voice strong with belief in his father, was gone. In his place was someone smaller, quieter, more defeated. At home, his dad noticed the change. "You okay, buddy?" his dad asked one evening. He'd just gotten home from his first job, still had another shift to get to soon. He was always tired, always rushing between one obligation and the next. But he always made time to check in with Danny. "I'm fine," Danny lied, not looking up from his homework. His dad studied him for a moment, those kind eyes that always saw more than Danny wanted them to see. "You sure? You seem quiet lately." "More than usual." "Just tired," Danny said. "School stuff." His dad nodded slowly like he wanted to push but didn't have the energy right then. "Well, you know you can talk to me about anything, right?" "Anytime." "I know, Dad." His dad ruffled his hair and went to take a quick shower before heading out to his night shift. Danny listened to the water running, felt the familiar ache of wanting to tell his dad what was happening but not wanting to burden him. His dad already worked so hard, was already stretched so thin. How could Danny add to that weight? So he kept it to himself, carried it alone. By the 3rd week, Danny had perfected the art of being unnoticeable. He'd figured out the exact timing to arrive at school. Not so early that he'd be stuck waiting around with other kids. Not so late that he'd draw attention. He knew which hallways were least crowded between classes, which bathroom stalls were usually empty, which corners of the playground were most isolated.